This video is brought to you by my Patreon supporters. I've acquired an ancient artifact in pristine condition. Ha! All the apps are missing. I've been robbed. They left me with Twitter. Well, we could turn it into a diorama. I have a rough idea of what I want to put in here, but I need something more real to reference. Let's see what we can throw together. We'll need some underwater rocks, fill the background, bring in some light. I found out if you hold down on a subject in photos, such as an ammonite, the iPad will trace it out for you. This saves so much masking time. I was looking for seaweed and found these cool fossil crinoids. Overlay that, and it's underwater. And let's add some life to this rock. Now that I have a rough idea of the composition, we can add some clay. I'm using Super Sculpty medium. I'm gonna start with the shell by forming a spiral pancake. Watch me freehand a spiral. I'm using this rubber tool to push the clay. This center is too high, so I need to carve that out. Now let's make the chamber this cephalopod lives in. Some isopropyl alcohol will smooth out the clay. Hey, I just remembered I have real life references. There's an ammonite. And here's the inside of a different species. My spiral isn't nearly as detailed and deep as it should be. Here's the improved version. I like this split ridged pattern. Let's add that to this shell. Fit check. It fits. I tried to find what species this is, but there are so many kinds it's hard to tell. I ruled out these ones. And these ones. Now I'm adding the split into the split ridges, bifurcating them. That looks pretty good. Just gotta replicate that on the rest of the shell. I wasn't expecting to use pliers. I'm using them to pinch these ridges. These are your final notches. We have our shell. Now let's sculpt this rock. It needs to look just like this, minus the watermark. Now I'm using a common household rock to texture the clay. Just like a real rock. Next up are the crinoids. These flowers might look like seaweed, but they're actually echinoderms, like starfish. The species with stems are called sea lilies. These ones are called feather stars. Instead of planting themselves, they swim around. Sometimes the planted crinoids will crawl away. The fossilized crinoids I'm referencing look a little different, but
you've seen one crinoid, you've seen them all.
I'm going to make a texture stamp to replicate that bony pattern the fossils have. I'm starting off the way I normally would for scales, except I'm connecting the holes to form a star-like pattern. Here's the finished stamp. Time to bake it. Let's try it out. It worked. Now for the body. Some branching arms. Now we can use the stamp. Nice. I'm gonna fill in all the blank spots with this ball tool. Now everything gets baked. Let's see how everything's fitting together. I sculpted an additional rock. It's coming together, but we need to get rid of some stuff. Why would you put a headphone jack in a smartphone? This is the camera. It's not a pretty picture. It is. I want to keep the camera, but we only need the lens. There's the lens. Better paint the back of this. Now we can stick this all together. I'm using Magic Sculpt epoxy clay to sculpt a new background. This will harden on its own, so I don't need to bake the phone, which seems like a bad idea. I'm using some water to smooth everything out. And we'll put a little nub in here to sculpt on later. Now just wait for it to cure. Now that that's cured, it's time to put something in that shell. But what was in that shell? The only living shelled cephalopods are Nautiluses. As you can see, these guys are very unique. They don't look like any other modern cephalopods. But researchers think ammonites were more like squids, with normal tentacles and normal eyes that are not shaped like a keyhole. So we won't be referencing Nautiluses. I liked how that illustration had one tentacle coming up around the shell, so I want to include that. Squids have 8 regular arms and 2 larger tentacles. I'm gonna try and fit as many as I can in here. Any missing ones will be on the far side. The trick to using epoxy clay is to keep your tools wet so the putty doesn't stick to them. And wear gloves. Once the epoxy began to stiffen up, I posed the tentacles and rested them on cardboard supports. Now that they're fully hardened, I can pull those out. It wouldn't be a cephalopod without a giant eye. I'm using UV resin to create some custom sizes. This should only take a minute. Glass is preferable because it holds up to light better, but that shouldn't be a problem here. Some acrylic paint. Let's paint these starting with the pupil. Cuttlefish, octopus, and squid all have shiny, reflective eyes, so I'm only using metallic colors. I also tried some enamel nail polish. I made a few different variations. Will it be the fancy red one? The bright green one? The bright green one? Or the big one? I'm going with that one. I'm putting a minimal hood here. Unlike Nautili, ammonites may have been able to retract inside their spiral home. Next, I'm adding a funnel, which is used for swimming and steering by shooting out water. All cephalopods have these. Since these tentacles are already hardened in place, I can sculpt this membrane between them without messing them up. Sometimes you have to let the clay harden before you can add more. The ammonite is complete. On top of that go the crinoid stems. Bake those. I'm going to use a round file to hollow out the backside of this stem. We don't have much depth in this iPhone, so I need this to fit as low as possible. And this one can fit here. Next up is our little rock buddy, the Trilobite. I have a few of these to look at. This species like to curl up. I'll be using epoxy clay once again, which is great for adding things because they'll harden in place. Rubber tools work well with epoxy, especially when it's still soft and only needs a delicate touch. Epoxy clay being sticky makes it easy to add onto it. All done with the Trilobite. Now for some paint. I've selected all the blues I'll need, and I can mix in black and white to lighten or darken them. Just a slight amount of water. Let's add in a little light. This isn't blending very well, but it's only going to be partially visible. Now let's add some warm highlights on the nearest areas. The blues are down, now we can focus on the subject. The flamboyant cuttlefish is a dashing little gentleman, and I'll be using its colors as inspiration. I threw it in an art program to decide what colors would go where. Let's get started. I'm bringing in that bright yellow. but I decided there wasn't enough room for the hot pink. Something's missing. Time to dab those suckers on. These will be easier to sculpt out of paint than clay. Now for the shell. Some dry brush highlights, of course. And a shadowy wash to match. Now I'm adding a striped pattern based on this shape on the cuttlefish. Whew! We did it. Let's do the Trilobite next. I was looking for some crab colors when I thought of the perfect crab. The horseshoe crab, which isn't actually a crab, but it is the most fitting arthropod to draw from. While not closely related, they have a lot in common, from their fossils to their faces. I'm adding some yellow gold and some burnt umber. The amount of water you add to the paint will change how it behaves. In this case, I want it to flow into the cracks, but I don't want it to flow off the Trilobite. I'm going back in with the original green to highlight those edges. Instead of black, he's getting a chocolate brown eye. Now I want to add some 3D texture. I'm applying some Mod Podge where I want the materials to stick. These rocks need some reinforcement, so I'm using super glue and baking soda. Now let's make some sea moss with Woodland Scenic's turf. All of that gets soaked in place with some watered down Mod Podge. Once this is dry, we can paint it. While I have this paint, I decided to add some blue light reflections coming up from the seafloor. I'm also adding a blue wash. I want to add some distorted light coming through the waves and reflecting off the sand. I'm gonna try adding a similar light effect to the top of this shell. We can't forget the Crinoids. I saved these for last because they go on top of everything else. I'm doing the regular dry brush and wash. Next we'll need one medium-sized feather. These are going to be the arms. Now we can glue these in. I'll be painting the state of Washington blue. That goes right here. For the next step, we'll need some Spanish moss. These are going to be the roots and arms that the crawling crinoids have. Mixed up modeling paste with some coral colored paint to fill these gaps. For the next step, I need to make an invisible shelf. I was thinking about adding squid ink, but soft tissue fossils don't show any evidence of an ink sac. So instead, I'm adding bubbles. They're very slippery. I think that's enough bubbles. I decided to go off script here and sculpt a school of fish. Gotta bake these. This is airbrush paint, but it should work. This pewter paint has a blue tint to it. That should make for some nice shadows and details. Let's stick these guys in here with some precision paper glue. Some of these fish require support. I'm using the plastic packaging from earlier to create little stands. I had to break the tail off of this one. He's gonna be just poking out. There they are, all shimmery. Here's how we're looking compared to the sketch. I think it's time for resin. I have been warming it up. I'm using 2-part epoxy resin with a 1:1 mix ratio. Just a touch of ocean blue resin dye. Don't add any oh great. I may have added too much dye, even though I was trying not to. I'm transferring to a clean cup to finish mixing. I'm using a heat gun to pop the bubbles, but this will be more effective later. Back to the heat gun. Some bubbles were hiding. I won't name which ones. I'm not happy about how much blue dye I added, but I did get some decent final shots. I'll be giving away these ammonite shells on Patreon.